want to drink rum, it's no scene. Who not drinking none, it's no scene. Everybody could come in and jump with the biggest team. Yo, shot master.
Hi. Good evening, good evening, good evening, and I want to thank all of you for joining me this evening. And I hope every single last one of you have on all your briefs, right? And your briefs on nice and tight, because it's going to be a very, 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 very interesting live this evening. And, you know, I feel like I might need a 1 week to recover after getting ready for this live. So let me greet those of you that are here. Hi Anne, hi Terrence, hi Stacy, Ayana, Janelsbeth, Petra, Leslie, Jennifer, John, Stacy, Roxanne, Sampa Scott, Allison, Henry, Marlene, Gemma, Colleen, Swavik Steele, Kai, Etienne, Shillingford, Debbie, Gloria, Munifi out in Tobago, Anne Marie, how are you? Judy, Daryl. Daryl said the wait has been hard, yes. Daryl, do you have on your briefs too? Do you have on your briefs? So, folks, we're here and we're going to be talking about the Law and Order Dream Team. And of course, I know most of you know what I've been talking about. On Friday, I started talking about Griffith and the role of the Commissioner of Police, the role of the TTPS, and the things that the TTPS are meant to be doing. But before I jump into that, I want to throw all your minds back a little bit to 2017. So I'm going to bring up something. Let me, big up to Tech Guy and his graphics. How will you like my modeling he briefs? I talking to Tech Guy this morning. He say, well, we were talking about the story, of course. And he say, well, it sounds like, it's a fire sale going on inside going on inside the TTPS. And I said, but imagine we reached the point where lawyers lining up for legal briefs from the TTPS, so that's what we're going to be getting into in a few minutes. But before we get into that, I want to throw all your mind back to this. Do you all remember this story? Do you remember this story where the Prime Minister would have made a statement? This is back in 2017, where a young lady had been killed in Movietown by her partner. And later on that week, there was a conversation with the Prime Minister. It would have been the start of 14 conversations with the Prime Minister. So it was... they had those meetings around very many constituencies. I think this one took place in Maloney. It took place in that wouldn't be David O'Mara. So Camille Robinson Regis's seat. So in the Maloney shopping mall there. And when questioned about the whole issue of gender violence, especially in the light of the killing of Jamelia DeRevenue at Movietown earlier that week, he was expressing his outrage and he was very angry, very upset about it. And he made a comment where he said, women need to pick their men wisely. Why am I starting with this? Because this is where I plan to end. I'm going to be ending the live today talking about the importance of choosing your men wisely. And I wanted to start by reminding folks about that statement made by the Prime Minister back in 2017 about picking their men wisely, right? And the Prime Minister came in for some heat for this statement because people felt, well, how do you go about saying to women, pick your men wisely? And it was some valid criticism, because the thing about it is, when men interested in you, men will show up and present their best selves, their best side. You don't meet men and as soon as you meet them, they immediately mistreating you. You don't meet men and they automatically violent and abusive and aggressive and those kinds of things, right? When you meet men, as a matter of fact, any abusive person, regardless of gender, you meet people and they will present their best selves. They will dress themselves up nice. They go pretty themselves up nice. They will try as much as possible to smoothen out their rough edges. But there are always red flags. The red flags are there. The red flags present themselves from time to time. And when you see a red flag, you must not ignore the red flags, right? But I felt that the criticism that was given back in 2017 to say, choose your women wisely, and people saying, well, you don't always know from the jump that this is how the man is going to be. I felt, okay, all right, I could see, I could grasp, I could get it, because basically what you're doing there is victim blaming, because you're basically telling women, well, all you went and pick up these men, all you're looking for whatever. Good. But I do agree, when you see the red flags, pay attention to the red flags, because the purpose of the red flags, whether it is in a relationship or on Maracas Beach, is to save your life, right? When you see the red flags, obey the red flags. That being said, in 2018, this government chose a commissioner of police. And back in 2018, when they were getting ready to select a commissioner of police, and they had the long list, or rather I should say, they had their merit list with the first 5 or 6 names on the merit list. I remember when I looked at the merit list, I had my thoughts on who I felt they should have chosen. And I also had my thoughts on who ought not to have been chosen. And I know one of the first things I said was, not Gary Griffith. And I gave my reasons back then. Now, nobody has to agree with my reasons. My reasons are my reasons. My position is my position. And I leave it up to everybody to decide, how they feel about a particular thing. But I will put forward my position on something, and I will also put forward my reasons. So I felt then that Griffith was not a good choice. And I stated publicly why I felt he was not a good choice. I pointed to him having served as Kamla Persad-Bissessa's national security advisor. And when he came in as her advisor, one of the first things that was done was, give me a second, I need to mute somebody who's rude enough to be making contact with me in the middle of a live. Right, I felt that because of his role as Kamla's advisor back then, and the fact that he was the person responsible for her making certain decisions and choices, and also the person who would have been responsible for the illegal state of emergency in 2011, and then when he became Minister of National Security, there were all of those questions about the spending that took place on the national security, because there were armored vehicles that he wanted to purchase. I believe he was in favor of soldier police. Soldier police happened under Jack Warner, but I believe he was in favor of those things. And there was one other thing that would have happened then, but I only found out about it after the fact, right? And that would have been our data, our personal data, being given to the Cambridge Analytica company, then called SCL, for use in terms of developing a prototype for how to weaponize social media to sway public opinion. Now, I was only clear that that had taken place here in Trinidad and Tobago after the 2015 general elections. So I'm not going to pretend that in 2014 that I was clear on it, but I knew by the time the 2015 general elections had taken place and saw all of the interference that had occurred, that there had been some sort of interference. And by that point in time, there was already an investigation into this company called SCL in the United Kingdom. And then eventually in 2016, SCL would have switched and become Cambridge Analytica, and there was interference from Cambridge Analytica into the US elections. And it was when the impact occurred on the US elections that it became a thing in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And by then, I had started following the story. And I was following the story very closely. It was myself and a handful of other persons that would have been talking about it. And I'd gotten to the point where I'd set up Google Alerts just so that I would be clear on precisely what had taken place. So when I saw those things, I said to myself, but this government and very many of the ministers within this government, and this, when I say this government, I mean the then People's Partnership government, had done things that were extremely concerning. So by 2018, I am absolutely clear that the National Security Ministry back in 2014 had played a role in leaking our data or giving away our data to various persons. I'm seeing people saying things about volume. My volume is really loud in my ears right about now. So I think folks who are having problems with volume, can you like exit the live and re-enter the live and see how it works for you then, please? Because if I put this any louder, I might damage my eardrums. So, back to what I was saying. So by 2018, when Griffith was selected, those were my reasons for not wanting him there. And I felt that he was going to be problematic. And within a couple weeks of him becoming the Commissioner of Police, there were a number of things that had taken place in terms of his behavior and his responses. And I immediately started to point out, oh boy, it is going to be an interesting term in office with this Commissioner of Police. Now, I grasp that one of the major issues Trinidadians have is with being unpopular. We don't like to be unpopular. We don't like to go up against persons. We don't like to challenge people. We don't like conflict. We like for people to like us. We like to be in a position where everybody could meet up, bounce up, and give one another a bounce, and we have drinks and things together. That's what we like. And there's nothing weird about that. Most human beings don't like conflict. Most human beings don't like to be in situations where they are in conflict. I am quite comfortable having conversations with persons that are uncomfortable. I am quite comfortable having opinions that are unpopular, especially when I think that the opinions are grounded in information and fact. So since 2018, I've had a particular stance and position on the former Commissioner of Police. And by the time I've wrapped up this evening, I'm going to be very clear about a number of things, and then I want to put this particular subject to rest, for me at the very least, for a period of time, because I feel I could leave it alone. I feel the conversation I want to have now, or the conversation I want to have moving forward, is what we're looking for with the next Commissioner of Police. Because I'm clear, Griffith can return as Commissioner of Police. So what I want us to start talking about eventually are the things that we need, the features, the characteristics we're supposed to be looking for with the next Commissioner of Police. And I want us to also start talking about the red flags that we need to be looking out for with the next Commissioner of Police, so that we don't end up in a situation where we have somebody whose tenure in office was toxic and unhealthy for the organization he, she, or it was running, right? So, the point I was making is, we don't like to be unpopular. But we, right now, in Trinidad and Tobago, we're at a point where we have to literally function as our own opposition. Because I don't know if all you recognize this or not, the United National Congress has collapsed. We don't have an opposition in the country at all. And because we don't have an opposition in the country, it means that we can't look for the person sitting on the other side of the parliament to ensure that the persons that are sitting in government do the right thing and don't abuse systems and don't abuse channels. That being said, it means that we need to understand properly how our institutions here are meant to work, how the Constitution is meant to work. And I was very grateful to Nizam Mohammed, Attorney Nizam Mohammed, last week, talking about the Constitution and talking about the importance and relevance of the Constitution. That interview for me was one of the most moving interviews that I've had to do in quite some time, because it resonated with me in a way that many other interviews have not resonated with me. Because the Constitution, our Constitution, is a really, really, really important document. It maps out for us precisely how the country is meant to be run. It gives you all of the details. And I mean, there are lots of other acts and laws, yes, but those 115 pages of the Constitution maps out, gives you the entire skeleton of our Constitution and our system of governance and how things are supposed to work. So, since the 24th of September, we have been here in an ongoing fashion discussing the Constitution, because from the 24th, that's when I started talking to you about the Police Service Commission and the role and responsibility of the President. It was from the 24th of September that I said that the Service Commission needed to step down. I also said that the Attorney General needs to step down. And my position on that has not changed. It's the same position that I had then that I have now. And after seeing the story in today's Guardian that came out today, and the number of questions that were raised in that story, my position remains quite firm and quite concrete. And so now we're going to get into the content of today's live. So the first thing I want to talk to you about, I want to talk to you all about the Commissioner of Police, the role of the Commissioner of Police, and what the Commissioner of Police is supposed to be doing. So we would have looked at that last week. Is it here? Yeah, we looked at that on Friday. So I just want to refresh people's memory a little bit. So the functions of the Commissioner of Police. Right, he has, is this the correct thing? No, I think I ended up on the wrong, oh my goodness. In any case, the Commissioner of Police is supposed to be dealing with law enforcement, and he has complete and total power over personnel, hiring, firing, moving people around, as well as monies. And because he's got all of those things, all of that power tied in, who he hires, who he fires, being able to move people around and being able to account for all of the spending, he's responsible for his budget. It means that he has absolute power with respect to the TTPS. And we discussed on Friday that there's a lot that we may have problems with in terms of how he has executed his duties, and I'm talking about the former commissioner, how the former commissioner executed his duties. But while things might have been unethical, they were not necessarily illegal. Back in 2006, the legislation, the Constitution was changed to give the Commissioner of Police power that he didn't have before. So prior to 2006, the Service Commission and the Ministry of National Security were the two bodies that controlled things like hiring, firing, discipline, and of course, money, the budget for the TTPS. I don't know if you all have noticed, when we have to hire a commissioner of police, a whole service commission has to sit down. There's a whole distinct service commission, the police service commission, that has to sit down and go through a recruitment process. The same thing does not happen when we have to appoint somebody to be the head of the fire services or even to be the head of the prisons, because fire and prisons get appointed by the Public Service Commission. So there's a whole service commission just for the TTPS. And that service commission had a lot of the power that the commissioner now has, the role and the position of the commissioner now has. So the legislation in 2006 would have changed. And when the legislation in 2006 changed, it gave the commissioner a lot more power. And it gave the commissioner a lot more power because for a long time, the commissioners themselves complained about how constrained they were in being able to do their jobs. Why am I going into all of this? I'm going into all of this because it is eventually going to become important for you to understand that the legislation was changed to give the commissioner more power. And so once you change legislation to give an office holder more power, it means that the office holder in and of himself or herself has to be far more accountable and has to demonstrate far more integrity in terms of how he or she is dispensing his or her duties. Why? Because the person has a lot of power. And when you have somebody in a position, a strong position, a leading position like that, with that much power, you must make sure that the person has a certain kind of character and the person understands precisely how to exercise the power that he or she has. Right. So that's the role of the commissioner of police. So Griffith would have gotten into power. He would have become commissioner of police. And there was a lot that I didn't agree with. There's a lot that other people agreed with. But some of the things I didn't agree with was calling people pests and cockroaches. I felt that nobody should be allowed, no commissioner of police should be calling anybody pests and cockroaches, if only because the term pests and cockroaches was invariably used and associated with black working class people. And if you are the head of the police service in a country where at least half the population is black and a significant amount of that black population is working class, you are using language that is racist, aggressive, abusive, and oppressive. So for me, once we had a commissioner who was willing to use that kind of language to talk about the citizenry that he is meant to be protecting and serving and enforcing laws for, that was a red flag. I felt that no commissioner of police, no office holder in any position in this country should ever be referring to persons as pests and cockroaches. Because when you hear the term pests and cockroach, you think that these are things that need to be exterminated. And once you start thinking that these are things and not just things, because you're referring to people as pests and cockroaches. So when you start referring to people as pests and cockroaches, the rest of the population starts thinking that these people aren't people. One, that's the first thing that happens. You start thinking, well, the minute you start to use words like that, you are basically saying that these people aren't people. They're insects. They are pests. They are things to be eradicated. And when you start talking about a citizenry and members of your public in that manner, you start to give other people license to think that it is okay to want to get rid of these people, to want to exterminate these people. Now, mind you, this is a country where we have not been able to actually exercise capital punishment, the hangman, in ages. Why? Because it's not seen as human or humane. As a matter of fact, in most other parts of the world, they have done away with hanging people or killing prisoners, right? So capital punishment is something that is being phased out in other parts of the world, and it may easily end up being phased out here, because there was actually a story in the newspapers today about the Privy Council and the hangman in Trinidad and Tobago. So we had somebody who was in charge of law enforcement who felt comfortable using terms like pests and cockroaches. Now I want all to pause for 2 seconds, because remember we started talking about people in toxic relationships and red flags in toxic relationships. So imagine you are in a relationship with somebody and that person feels absolutely comfortable speaking about you and other persons in language that is derogatory, in language that makes you less than human, in language that defines and describes you as subhuman. So that language was being used, and I thought to myself, is nobody going to pull up Griffith on this? Now, at that point in time, I'm not thinking Minister of National Security, nor am I thinking Prime Minister, because you can't have people from the government interfering with the Commissioner of Police. The way our Constitution is set up, and this is why it's important for me to keep referencing and referring to the Constitution. The way our Constitution is set up, the Commissioner of Police is meant to function as an independent entity, right? So he doesn't answer to a Prime Minister, he answers to the Police Service Commission, because they have the responsibility for engaging in disciplinary action. So you had a commissioner who was using language like that. You had a commissioner who was coming onto social media and lashing out at members of the public on social media and saying all kinds of nasty things. I'm not even talking about myself. I am not talking about myself. Gary was calling me names from day one. By September of 2018, he was all over radio calling me orange head. And I was like, okay, if that's the route you want to go, that's the route you want to go. But it was when his persona, his Facebook persona, started lashing out and attacking random persons on social media because they were critiquing and criticizing any action that came out of the TTPS. I paused and I said to myself, how can we possibly have a situation where a person who is meant to enforce laws here, protect citizens here, feels that it's absolutely fine to get onto social media and attack and insult and say abusive things to members of the public on social media? And the thing is, the only thing that was keeping him safe at that point in time is the fact that we don't have laws against hate speech on social media platforms. And I used to be thinking to myself, the AG needs to pass some laws here though. Because once you have laws against that kind of language and that kind of behavior on social media, he would have real questions to answer and possibly criminal charges to face. But that didn't happen, and that's fine. You know, I ain't gonna tell nobody how to run the legislative agenda. But I did note again that you would have had Griffith performing a particular kind of behavior that for me was a huge red flag, and he got away with it. Not just got away with it, but we were applauding him. I would be looking on social media and I'd be seeing members of the public applauding the commissioner, talking about, yeah, the commissioner real good at clap back. And I thought to myself, does nobody understand that this is a person who is in control of 7,000 armed officers? Is it that we don't understand that this sort of behavior from a commissioner of police sends the wrong message to the rest of the population? Is it that we don't understand that what we're doing when we cheer this on is we're basically giving people a pass to be abusive and oppressive on social media platforms? Is it that we're not grasping that at all? That we don't see the ways in which we were enabling toxic behavior? So there was that taking place, where you had persons where you had the persona of the commissioner of police, whether it was commissioner of police or Captain Gary Griffith or Gary Griffith Jr., whichever one of those profiles, right, attacking and insulting people on social media and being cheered on. Everybody thinking that that was fine, that was acceptable behavior. And I'm looking on thinking to myself, are we crazy? Because if you was to see a man on the side of the road cussing a woman or cussing a child or just cussing another person in that way, would you think that that was fine? Would you think it was okay? Would you think it was acceptable behavior? No. And yet here we were allowing somebody, not just anybody, we were allowing the commissioner of police to be attacking people on social media day after day, as if it was entirely normal and acceptable behavior. Now imagine how we all respond if we were to see a police officer, and let me go with a random black police officer being abusive in that fashion to anybody on the side of the road. We would automatically bawl out, "Oh, you're too wicked," right? We would automatically understand that that behavior from a police officer is abusive behavior. Yet somehow Griffith does it on social media and nobody had a problem with it. To the point where anytime I made a comment or criticized his behavior as commissioner, there would be either him or persons in support of him who would fly over onto my threads. And I would pause. I mean, I'd look at that and I'd be thinking to myself, people seeing what is going on here? That in a country where free speech is enshrined, freedom of expression is enshrined, you're in a position where you criticize or critique the commissioner of police, and he would show up on your wall and his supporters would show up on your wall and begin to attack you. And the Police Service Commission did nothing, said nothing, acted as if they were entirely unaware that any of these things were taking place, right? Entirely unaware. Nothing took place, nothing occurred at all by way of disciplinary action. At least if anything took place by way of disciplinary action, the Police Service Commission never made the public aware of it. They never accounted to the public. So there you had this trajectory of behavior. And the trajectory of behavior got disturbing, even more disturbing, because I mean, what I'm talking about is disturbing enough. And I mean, I've discussed the Cecil Skeet issue here with you all, where Cecil Skeet would have told the newspapers that he was, I think, slapped and choked by the former commissioner. Then, of course, we would have seen there are other stories of police brutality that would have occurred under his tenure. And I've talked about behaviors that other persons would have pointed out. And then the time he would have gone after Alan Brazan on social media over the Andrea Barrett killing, right? Then last year, I started to notice a particular trend. And this is going to get me into the meat of what it is I want to discuss here this afternoon. When the state of emergency kicked in, when the pandemic kicked in and we went into lockdown, so not state of emergency was this year. So I'm back in 2020. When the pandemic kicked in and we had to go into the various stages of lockdown, remember there were all of these restrictions to our actions and activities, right? And with all of those restrictions, we had to be reliant on either the chief medical officer or the attorney general. And at that point in time, we had Minister Young doing a lot of the interpretation of the public health ordinance issues for us, because I think he was still, what was he then? Was he national security then? He might have been national security by then, yes? In any case, we had Minister Young and the CMO, and from time to time the Minister of Health, explaining the variations and the changes in the public health ordinance, what we were allowed to do, what we were not allowed to do. And there were a couple of things that I started to notice then. You all remember parties were not allowed. You all remember very early on they said that people couldn't be out walking. And I think if you were walking, the most you were allowed to walk in was in pairs, like groups of 2. And there was all of this talk about field sports and that sort of thing. And the CMO and Minister Young both came out and said, no exercise means no exercise. This was the point where they were saying no exercise. And the Commissioner of Police was very upset about that no exercise thing. And he came out and challenged the public health ordinance. And I thought it was odd. The public health ordinance to me seemed straightforward. And yet here was the Police Service Commissioner going up against the person who would have been his line minister. So that's it. So Minister Young would have been Minister of National Security at that point in time. So your line minister comes out and says, this is what the public health ordinance says. And then the Commissioner of Police, who is not directly answerable to the Minister of National Security, but his funding comes through the Ministry of National Security, then decides that he is going up against both the Minister of National Security and the CMO in the public domain. And I thought, but that's odd. Why would you do something like that? These are people that you need to continue to sit around tables and negotiate things with. And it was at that point in time that I began to realize something. If Griffith came out and said something, he would be invariably backed up by the Attorney General. So I started to watch a couple things. So I want to jog all your memory a little bit. All remember this issue? All remember this story? Sorry. Y'all remember this story about the zest that took place in Bayside? This would have been September last year. September the 10th. So this zest takes place, and it caused a lot of conversation in the public domain. And it caused a lot of conversation in the public domain because up until that point in time, up until September, we would be hearing, we didn't have concrete evidence, right? But we would have been hearing that parties were taking place within certain communities, within certain class groups in this country, because I don't want to make it seem like it's a color issue. It's more of a class issue, an economic issue, than it is an ethnicity issue. So we would be hearing about persons in particular income groups, at particular socio-economic class groups, being able to get away with behavior that persons from other socio-economic class groups couldn't get away with. So if there were parties taking place in Kelly village, for instance, Malabar, Laokita, whatever it is, I remember when some youngsters in, is it Sealots? The Sealots area went and they went swimming in the bay in Sealots. And we would have had all of those children laid out on the ground. So all of them had to lie down on the ground, hand behind their back and thing. And they were on video. So video of them was shown. Yes, thank you very much, Kareem. Sea lots, and video was shown of them, all of them on the ground, just by the seaside. They're in the back of sea lots, and then all of them sit down in a bus, right? They were made to sit down in a bus and hide their face and thing, and they had to apologize to the commissioner of police, right? Guns pointing at them, you know, and they had to apologize to the commissioner of police. And there were a number of other issues where people would be outside, I think breaking whatever was the public health ordinance, and they would cuss and carry on and whatever, and the police would go and grab them and put them on camera and make them apologize to the commissioner of police. And there would be no blurring of faces. They're making sure that you see the person's faces. Mind you, none of these persons would have been arrested and charged with anything. So there's no reason to be doing those kinds of things to them unless they have been formally charged. But what would be happening is that they would be publicly shamed. This was the commissioner choosing to exercise his power to publicly shame persons who were in breach of the public health ordinance. But you know what we weren't seeing? You're seeing the picture in front of you here. We were not seeing persons from Bayside and persons from any of the other upscale communities being treated in the same way. So we would have heard about this party, right? This pool party that took place in Bayside Towers. We heard about the pool party, but we never once saw any footage of people spread out on the ground with the hand tied behind their back, being forced to apologize to the to the nation of Trinidad and Tobago or to the TTPS. And my understanding from back then is that the persons on that compound were also just as abusive to the police. They refused to be questioned, they refused to be detained, and they basically said that the TTPS had no jurisdiction at Bayside Towers. And that's when there was a whole big public argument about public versus private spaces. You all remember that argument about was it distinction between public versus private? And Griffith would have come out and buff everybody and tell them if tickets were being sold, then that would have made it a public space. But because no tickets were sold to any event and it was a private space, and the police, and we would have had the Attorney General jump out to defend Griffith. All you remember that? Do you all remember that? And there were 3 parties at Bayshore that weekend. Not one, 3 parties. One party, to the best of my knowledge, involved persons from a foreign country. Then there was another party that would have involved persons of Latin American descent. And then there was another party that involved persons who related to a high-ranking government official here. There were 3 parties that occurred that weekend. And at no point in time were we ever in a position to see any of the persons who were at any of those parties in a position where they're apologizing for anything, or they spread out on the ground having to face any questions from the TTPS. So that particular incident was so egregious. It got people so vexed and so heated here because of the clear prejudice, the clear bias that was taking place, the clear fact that the law was being applied unevenly. And not only was the law being applied unevenly, or the law was being enforced unevenly. So I want to make this point, and I want to make this point very clear, because I saw some comments a little while ago when I was saying that my position on the AG has not changed, and people say he's staying there and he's not stepping down. That's fine. That's absolutely fine if that's your position. My position is he ought to step down. And I am going to build my case this evening, and after I've built my case, I done. Me and nothing else to say. Right? But you had clear prejudice. Clear prejudice. As a matter of fact, clear prejudice. Right? And persons from a particular socio-economic background was able to get away, and persons from a different socio-economic background were consistently publicly embarrassed under this public health ordinance. So at a press conference later on that week, the Saturday press conference, the Prime Minister would have been asked a question, and he was asked the question not just because of what happened and what Griffith said. He was asked the question because the Attorney General again jumped out to defend the Commissioner of Police's interpretation of public versus private. I don't know. All it is remember these things. It can't be me alone that is be remembering these things.
Let me join the conversation now. In Trinidad and Tobago, we expect that the law will be applied to every person, regardless of race, color, creed, class, or social standing. Because those who believe that they are beyond the reach of this virus, you could say so for yourself, and that may suit you in comforting your irresponsible conduct. But in so doing, you pose a threat to the rest of our national community, to the little children who are helpless and require the behavior of adults to be such that give them a chance, to the persons with underlying medical conditions who require those who are well and moving around to behave responsibly, to those elder citizens who are depending entirely on not being exposed in the simplest way to this virus. They request, through me, to the Minister of National Security, to the police service, that you ensure that there's an improvement in the conduct of our nationals where the law applies across the board, especially to those for whom priority is partying. Persons who...
So let me ask you something. The Attorney General, as you well know, plays a critical role in forming the government here in this country, right? He plays a very, very critical role in forming the government. Without an Attorney General, you can't have a government being constituted, right? So let's look at bits of our Constitution. So according to Section 75 of the Constitution, when you want to set up a cabinet, once an election has occurred and you're getting ready to form your government, there shall be a cabinet for Trinidad and Tobago which shall have the general direction and control of the government of Trinidad and Tobago and shall be collectively responsible therefore to Parliament. The cabinet shall consist of the Prime Minister and such number of other ministers, of whom shall be the Attorney General. You see that bit there? All them other ministers, all, finance, health, security, education, culture, planning and development, digital transformation, all them other ministers could cease to exist. You know who cannot cease to exist? The Prime Minister and the Attorney General. If all of those other ministers disappear tomorrow and only the Prime Minister and Attorney General are here, we have a government. We have a government. So you need an Attorney General and a Prime Minister to be able to have a government. That's what constitutes a government. That's why as soon as an election takes place here, the first thing that happens, you swear in the Prime Minister, and right after you have sworn in the Prime Minister, you then swear in the Attorney General. That's how it goes. And once you have sworn in that Prime Minister and Attorney General, ladies and gentlemen, you have a government. The two of them could decide that they ain't swearing in nobody else thereafter until they feel like it, and the whole country could run. the whole country could run. So that is to let you know how important an attorney general is. And so the next question has to be, what's the responsibility of an attorney general? I'm glad you asked. So let's look at it. So the attorney general is responsible for the administration of legal affairs in the country. In the case of civil proceedings, they conduct civil proceedings in the name of the attorney general, and in the case of criminal proceedings, in the name of the state. So the attorney general is a legal advisor, not just to the cabinet, but he is the person who leads legal policy, legislative policy, laws, the development of laws in the country, for the entire country. So the point of the attorney general, the purpose of the attorney general, is to create laws for everybody. Laws, and the attorney general is not meant to be making laws for one person or two persons, for everybody. So when he drafts legislation, it must be legislation that is fair and protects everybody. And so it means that if the attorney general is going to be giving advice to the commissioner of police, and I will eventually start to talk about what kind of advice that is meant to be provided. If the attorney general is giving advice to the commissioner of police, the advice must be even-handed. It can't be a situation where if a party taking place in PRCO, everybody could get locked up and spread out on the ground. Or if young people on a beach in sea lots, everybody gets spread out on the ground. But if you're down the islands on a pleasure boat, or if you're by your wealthy family beach house, or if you buy a gated community pool party, that things get applied differently. So when all of this sort of old noise in the public domain started to crop up about public versus private, and the attorney general jumped in to defend the commissioner of police, I was like, that's not right. It's not right. Now, it didn't sit well with me, but I didn't make no old noise. What I did do was say that, there was an uneven application of the law. And I was glad to see the Prime Minister come out and make the statement he made about how the law was meant to be applied evenly for everybody. And to point out that justice, that's how justice is supposed to be dealt with, in an even-handed way. It is only this year, though, that I started to pay attention to the advice that was being given. So recently, because when I started to feel, okay, water more than flour for me, and again, I'm saying that this is my opinion, and this is me building and developing my reasons here for how I arrived at my opinion. It was when paragraph 4 was an issue. When paragraph 4 was passed, that's when I said to myself, this can't continue. So let me start to make some points here. The Attorney General is a member of the government and the cabinet. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is meant to be an independent institution. So ideally, while the Attorney General and the Office of the Attorney General can and ought to be providing advice on civil matters to the TTPS, it ought not to be interfering with activities from the TTPS, right? Because you're meant to have that independence of the institutions. If you have too much incestuous activity happening between the two institutions, then you could be accused of interference, right? And no government wants to appear to be interfering with any of its independent organizations and institutions. And that's why when Griffith would have been carrying on in a particular way, as much as I felt that the Police Service Commission ought to be saying something about Griffith's behavior. You would not have ever once heard me say, but why Minister Young is saying something to Gary? Or why Minister Hines not saying something to Gary? Or whoever would have been Minister of National Security while he was Commissioner of Police. Because I understood that the Minister of National Security could not be seen to be interfering with what was taking place with the TTPS. And so because the Minister of National Security, who is the line minister for the TTPS, can't be interfering with the TTPS, it stands to reason that other ministries can't be interfering with the TTPS either. They can provide support and they have to be reached out to for information, but they can't be interfering. So I started after a while to think, okay, all right, what's really going on here? Like, how is it when one person, the minute Griffith jumps out and says something, and it's sounding controversial, or it's sounding shaky, or it's sounding like it's not proper law, you always have the AG jumping in right after to defend and to try to explain and to make it make sense. So then this other story cropped up, and this is when the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up, right? Where is the story? Let me pull it up properly for you. Oh, you remember that story? Oh, you remember this story? This Coast Guard story? So you had this pleasure cruise ride. And in this story that was published on the 8th of August 2021. Towards the end of this story, the reporter calls the Attorney General and asks the Attorney General to comment on the story, right? And the Attorney General basically says that once people on the boat had on masks, there was nothing weird or untoward. And I thought to myself, but that's odd. Because if they're not living down the islands and they've gotten onto a vessel at a point in time where you're not allowed to be gathering and you have 14 people on a vessel and they're not heading to their home down the islands. It's not a situation where any of them have a house that they were heading to down the islands and the others catch a ride to be able to go to their homes down the islands. That's not what took place with this. 14 persons got onto a boat to have a party, a farewell party. And Chandler comes out, because it's lower down in the story. Chandler comes out and he says he was not arrested, he have nothing to answer to, he didn't breach the public health ordinance. And the Attorney General, later down in the story, also says, no, he didn't. Once they had on masks on the boat, there was no breach of the public health ordinance. And I thought, but that had to be weird. And how is it a situation where as soon as this occurs and there are questions in the public domain about Chandler's behavior and activity, the first person to jump up and make a statement and comment about it is the Attorney General? So you all have to grasp something here. We still, and this is not a bad thing, we understand that there are certain offices in this country that come with a certain level of importance and significance. And the office of the Attorney General is one of those offices, right? It's one of those positions that traditionally has a certain amount of seriousness attached to it. When you hear something has been said by the Attorney General, you take it seriously. When you hear that somebody holds the title Attorney General, you take that person seriously. So when you have the Attorney General coming out to say there's no problem here, there's no issue here, there's no breach of the public health ordinance here, aren't you going to take that seriously? Aren't you going to then pause and think, well, okay, but we've been hearing for the longest while that you're not supposed to be gathering, you're not supposed to be going out, you're not supposed to be on the sea even, right? Unless you've got a home down the islands, you ain't supposed to be, and unless you're a fisherman and this is how you're applying your trade, there's not supposed to be any pleasure boating, none of these things. And yet, here you are hearing from the person who drafts the public health ordinance. And that's the thing that immediately had me like, huh? Because the Attorney General is the person who drafts the ordinance. He sits down every single week when there are changes. His office is the office that is responsible for drafting the new ordinance and putting all of these legal notices out. So when I saw this story on the 8th of August, I get up this Sunday, read that story, and I said to myself, but this is madness. This is absolute craziness. We would have just heard that there are all of these things you're not supposed to be doing at all. And now here are 14 persons on a boat. The Coast Guard went and get them. The Riverine police had to accompany the Coast Guard. They were eventually brought in. And now you're being told that there's no breach. That was then. Subsequently, we would have heard that there was a breach. Now, this is where things for me start to get really interesting. So, at the point in time that this story broke, right, the 8th of August, well, I mean, I had spoken about the issue beforehand. This story was on the Sunday, and I talked about the Coast Guard issue on the Friday. I talked about it in a live, and I come here and tell all you, I hear this story, and this which is I hear, and it's only after that the story made it into mainstream news. So it break here first, right? We had a exclusive here on News Source. When this story broke, that is when I started saying to myself, okay, this is a criminal offense though, because if you break a law, that's a crime. It's a criminal offense. So I then started asking friends of mine who are lawyers, who advises the TTPS on criminal offenses? And they said to me, the Office of the DPP. So I said, well, then the Office of the Attorney General advises on what? And they said, civil matters. So I need you all to be clear on something. There are two different kinds of matters that you will have here. You will have civil matters, you will have criminal matters. Civil matters will have to do with civil suits, defamation, those kinds of things. Criminal matters, law broken. And once a law has been broken, once a law has been breached, or there's a potential that the law has been breached, the TTPS, by practice, is supposed to rely on the Office of the DPP for advice. So then I started asking, how is it that every single time one of these criminal issues take place, once there's a possible breach of a law, how is it that the office or the person, right, or the office holder rather, how is it that the office or the office holder that we hear the most from, that the public hears the most from in terms of the interpretation of the law and what the law means, is the AG and not the DPP? So now let's go to the story in today's papers. So the Guardian seems to be having an October revolution, and it is an October revolution that clearly nobody tell the Guardian about, because when I got up this morning and I saw this story in the Guardian, I was real surprised. You all saw the story? Did you all see the story? Let me see if I could pull up. Yeah, let me pull up the page. Let me just pull it up and let you catch a glimpse of it. So there is this story in the Guardian today, and I think that everybody should take a read of this story when they get a chance later. I'm going to go through the story, bits of the story now, because the story talks about $1 million legal fees at the Commissioner of Police's office, and that the fees are under investigation. Now, under the People's Partnership, we would have heard stories about lawyers getting a lot of briefs. So it was almost like a kind of CPEP for lawyers thing that happened under the People's Partnership, right? Where they would have been where legal briefs, legal work was just being handed out, and so that's how many lawyers were earning a living. So I saw this story this morning and I started to read through the story, and I have to say there was a lot of detail in the story. Plenty details. So let's start from the top. So the story goes on to say, it talks about all of these legal briefs that being handed over to attorneys. And they spoke to a legal mind, somebody who working in the state's who is working as a state attorney. And that person was giving information. And the person says, according to the State Liability and Proceedings Act, the Solicitor General's office and the state solicitor office should defend the state. So I guess let me make some sense here. Let me slow it down and explain why I'm saying CPEP for lawyers. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service could detect crime. The role of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is to investigate crime and build cases. After you have investigated a crime and you have built a case, so you interview people, you collect your evidence, you have your ballistics report and whatever it is. Once you have built a case, you then send the case file over to the office of the DPP once it's a criminal matter. And then the DPP will recommend whatever charges need to be made, and the case goes back to the TTPS and then they can lay charges. That's how it works basically. Now, the TTPS can also have to face cases itself, as in not make case, but be a part of a case. And in those instances, because people sue the TTPS for things all the time. I mean, I'm sure you all see the stories where the police get sued for abuse and whatever, right? So there are a range of things that the TTPS could be sued for. So the TTPS can be sued, and so of course if they get sued, they have to be represented, and the organizations that will play a role in representing them will be the Solicitor General's office and the office of the Solicitor General and the Chief State Solicitor. So I just want to show you all the roles and functions of three different organizations here. So you have the office of the DPP, and they undertake criminal prosecution in all of the high courts. They are also responsible for passing on, if any of our matters go before the Privy Council, they have to brief counsel in the United Kingdom. They undertake prosecution in complex matters. They formulate prosecution policy, that sort of thing. That's what the office of the DPP does. Then we have the Chief State Solicitor. That's another arm of the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs. And you will see here that they are responsible for contracts, conveyancing, the Administrator General, public trustee, mental health applications, official receiver. Those are some of the things. So they deal up a lot with property law and commercial law. So contracts and property and things to do with town and country and that kind of stuff. And then you have the office of the state solicitor, and they do a lot of advising on all right, there we go. They do a lot of advising on this for the state on all aspects of civil law. All of this to say that when there are civil matters, we have the office of the state solicitor as well as the chief state solicitor to advise all ministries, not just the TTPS. So all government entities and ministries can rely on these three offices for legal advice. What am I trying to say here? That we, the taxpayers, have a whole legal team. We have a big legal team. There are a number of state attorneys in this country. And the state attorneys will fall under the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Chief State Solicitor, the Office of the Solicitor General. And I need to take my time and explain this. Also, the TTPS has its own legal department, because I'm sure you all remember that Chandler, let me show him, told you, that this gentleman is the Director of Legal Services at the TTPS, right? So the TTPS in and of itself has a legal department. There are many police officers that are also lawyers. So the TTPS has a legal department. Then the state itself, through the Office of the Attorney General, has at least 2 legal departments. And then you have the independent Office of the DPP. So the Office of the DPP is there for criminal advice, and then Chief State Solicitor and Solicitor General, they are there for civil matters, to give advice on non-criminal matters. Where am I going with this? According to this story in The Guardian today, the TTPS has been bypassing the use of state lawyers and hiring lawyers from private firms. That's a big deal. And it's a big deal because it's costing us money. The reason the state has all of these state attorneys and all of these legal entities is to save the taxpayers money, to save me and you money. I am currently dealing up with not 1, not 2, but 3 defamation cases from Gary Griffith. And Griffith, for all of those legal actions, would have had the actions taken out, as the name on the documents is the Commissioner of Police. So I wanted to try and understand something. I, as a taxpayer, will be funding the Chief State Solicitor's Office, the Solicitor General's Office, the Office of the Attorney General, and the Office of the DPP. So that means my money, my tax dollars, going towards those offices, maintaining those offices, ensuring that salaries get paid to those offices. And then you have, according to this story in the papers here today, the TTPS hiring private attorneys. So if the TTPS hiring private attorneys, it means that they're bypassing the state attorneys that my dollars already paying for, and my tax dollars also jumping up to pay private lawyers. Why is that? And why has nobody from the Office of the Attorney General asked the TTPS why they bypassing state attorneys? Because that's what this story begins to build for you today. That this thing is happening. The TTPS is hiring all of these external private attorneys, right? Wayne Sturge and whoever else, right? Because they name some of the law firms in the story. Those persons are being hired at the expense of us, the taxpayers, and nobody is raising a red flag. Nobody is saying, hey, this isn't right. So let's go a little further into this story, because the person, the legal mind that they spoke to, they said that traditionally this does not happen. Traditionally, what would happen is when the TTPS, when the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service needs legal support, their legal team within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service will reach out to the Solicitor General or the Chief State Solicitor, and they will provide lawyers. And if it comes to them needing a silk, somebody with silk, then the Office of the Attorney General is who will recommend and say, yes, this particular case needs a lawyer who has silk, right? And so then they will hire either an SC or a QC to lead a case. But what you would have is an instructing attorney from the state, right? So the instructing attorneys would be state attorneys, and the advocate attorney might be silk, that is paid for through the office of the Attorney General. Instead, what is going on is the TTPS budget itself, the money that's supposed to be paying salaries, paying overtime, making sure that the TTPS running efficiently, that budget was also going towards paying all of these lawyers. That's what it says, and that's what the story basically leading towards. And the funny thing is, when the reporters reach out to Griffith, Al-Rawi, and Chandler, as well as one of the private attorneys, to answer questions, everybody mute. Everybody have a sore throat. Everybody all of a sudden can't talk. They need a strepsils. Or they have a strepsils to get them. So, let me show you all some of the things that came out in the story. The person says, I can speak authoritatively for the period that I was head of the police service. Okay, so this is Stephen Williams here. They reached out to Stephen Williams, and this is Stephen Williams responding here. He says, I can speak authoritatively for the period that I was head of the police service. That was not the practice. I am actually unaware of any period of time that the legal department would have undertaken that type of activity, because the state is entrusted with attorneys, and once a matter is before the court, we normally engage the state to represent the Attorney General's office according to what it may be. They may choose to retain a senior counsel from private to assist in a matter combining the state resources of state attorneys to work with a senior counsel who is in private practice. Right? So this is Stephen Williams saying what was the practice under him. That you'd have the state attorneys, and if the office of the Attorney General approved, then they would get a private attorney who is a senior counsel. That's when they would go and get private attorneys. So it wouldn't be like just any and every private attorney. The private attorney would invariably be like silk. So you would have state attorneys working alongside with a senior counsel for certain cases, and it depended on the case. So the article goes on to say that the AG, Chandler, and Griffith are silent. And I thought to myself, but these are people who like to talk. At least the AG and Griffith, they love to talk. I mean, they don't miss an opportunity to be talking about the issues that are happening, whether it's in the TTPS or whether it's to do with legislation. So this is what the story goes on to say. So Guardian Media reached out to the AG, and when he received the questions on October the 8th, he says he was heading into the budget. All right, so at that point in time, he heading into the budget, he can't really answer questions. And so they said, well, all right, we will await your telephone call or written response. Listen to the questions that were asked. How did Gary Griffith get a legal budget to pay external employees? Because there is no vote within the TTPS for paying external employees. He may have, what is suggested in the story is that a line item called fees might have been the line item that was used to pay attorneys. The next question is, where's the money coming from? The next question, and this is an important question, was a note taken to cabinet to facilitate this. So basically, did they go through the proper channels for utilizing this money, these set of increased fees? Can you say if an investigation is being conducted into the expenditure of the TTPS's legal department? So those are the questions that would have been asked of the Attorney General. Now, I want us to look at the questions that would have been asked of Griffith. All right, so these are the questions that would have been asked of Griffith. On what authority did the Commissioner of Police's office bypass the Solicitor General Department, which has traditionally provided legal representation to the TTPS, and started retaining external counsel? Were you given any official correspondence or memorandum from the Attorney General advising of the new policy? Did you sanction the bypassing of the Solicitor General's department by the Commissioner of Police's Office for Legal Representation? Or are you aware of who sanctioned this move to breach the constitutional arrangements that have governed the legal relationship between the AG and the Commissioner of Police's Office regarding legal representation? This is a very critical question. If this happened, and since the story claims that that's what the records are showing, if those things happen, who sanctioned it? And if it was happening, how come neither Griffith nor the Office of the Attorney General, so how come the Commissioner nor the Office of the Attorney General saw fit to do anything about this issue at all? Then are you aware of a note being taken to Cabinet to facilitate or support the bypassing of the Solicitor General's office? I want you all to understand something. What this story raised today in the public domain is that the Commissioner of Police's office and the Office of the Attorney General seem to have done absolutely nothing at all about the bypassing of a constitutional arrangement that has been there for forever. That the TTPS, when it has cases, its lawyers and the state's lawyers work together on cases. It is not a situation, it is not a regular arrangement to bypass state lawyers and go and get regular run-of-the-mill lawyers externally to do things. So now I want to know who's paying for all of these defamation lawsuits that cropped up in the last year. Because the story raises it as well. The newspaper story asks, who is paying for those lawsuits? Why? Because in the story, well, they asked Chandler questions too. And they asked Chandler questions about a particular lawyer. They asked, how was Joel Roper selected as external counsel for the TTPS? How is it that Joel Roper came to be paid by the TTPS and not the Ministry of the Attorney General? So you see, again, questions about budgeting and handling of money get raised here because the normal practice, the usual practice is that when the TTPS is getting an external attorney, the Office of the Attorney General approves it, and then the Office of the Attorney General will pay those fees. It doesn't come out of the TTPS's budget. So if this is happening, if the money for these lawyers coming out of the TTPS, then it means that the TTPS funding and paying a set of private attorneys. So they continue to ask Joel Roper, how is it that you came to be paid? Well, they're asking Chandler that. Who authorized the bypassing of the Solicitor General and Chief State Solicitor's Department? Who authorized you, Chandler, to retain external lawyers to act on behalf of the TTPS? So a long list of questions that point to a breach of process and use of public funds in a manner in which traditionally you don't use public funds. So, then this brings me, because this is an issue with legal fees, then this brings me right back to paragraph 4. You all remember paragraph 4? Let me see if I could find paragraph 4. Where is paragraph 4? Let me get back to paragraph 4. This is paragraph 4. This is where I started my journey on September the 24th. This is where I got to the point where I said, in my opinion, this gentleman needs to step down. Because paragraph 4 is that piece of legislation inside Legal Notice 183 that would have put in place provisions to make it so that Griffith would be back or in a position to be selected as the acting commissioner of police. I have a problem with the nature of the relationship that seems to be prevalent with respect to these two guys. I have a problem with how uncomfortable I feel about whenever Griffith said something that ran counter to the law, that we would have an attorney general that would jump out and defend him. I am uncomfortable with the fact that a piece of legislation would have been passed that really and truly facilitated the approval of one specific person for a position. I have a problem with the bypassing of processes from one institution, one independent institution, which would be the TTPS, to another independent institution, which would be the AGLA. And everybody all of a sudden has gotten very quiet about what would have happened and what ought to have happened and what didn't happen. Nobody wants to answer any questions, and it's not a situation where these are persons who aren't articulate and can't speak. We know Gary very good at that. Up until this evening, he was busy putting up posts about crime and crime stats and whatever else. And so my concern is that we have a situation where persons who should have been doing better, who should have acted better, who should have acted otherwise, who should have been ensuring that their actions were always ever benefiting the entire country, because their roles are very important roles. One person is responsible for making law and the other person is responsible for establishing order. And if they worked together and worked together properly and worked together in a manner that was accountable, full of integrity and above board, they could have been the law and order dream team that this country required. Instead, you have a situation where laws were being applied inequitably. And when the laws were applied inequitably by one, you had the other jumping out to defend the inequitable application of the law, or when things can't be explained, going absolutely mute and absolutely quiet and not explaining anything at all. So this is where I go right back to the Prime Minister. Back in February 2017, he would have said, when he was asked questions about domestic violence, he says, "I'm not in your bedroom and I am not in your choice of men. So you have to choose your men wisely." So I want to say this to the Prime Minister. We're not in your cabinet. Those of us who are here, we're not in your cabinet. We can't be in your cabinet because we aren't elected officials. We are the people who elected officials. And we need you to pick your men wisely. Because when you don't pick your men wisely, we end up having to deal up with the abuse. We end up having to deal up with the unfair behavior. We end up having to take the licks. So, Mr. Prime Minister, you're a person that I have immense respect for. So I'm going to ask you to take some of your own advice and pick your men wisely. Because I don't think that as a country, and as a democracy, that we could continue to cope with bad choices. So, I will see you all next week Sunday. I'm taking a break for the rest of the week because I'm
Who
pretty
wants to
tired.
drink rum? It's no scene. Who not drinking none? It's no scene. Everybody could come
You all have
in
yourself
and jump with the biggest team.